United States Army presents The Big Picture, an official report produced for the armed forces and the American people. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
Chemical warfare has come a long, long way since the days of the cavemen, when flame and burning coals were used to drive off the enemy. No thinking person looks on this development with any sense of pride, but rather one of reality. Because today, the threat of large-scale chemical, biological, and radiological warfare cannot be ignored. Working up defenses against chemical, biological, and radiological warfare is the responsibility of the Army Chemical Corps, the subject of today's Big Picture. Our story begins at an airport near the nation's capital, not very long ago.
It was shortly before noon when I arrived at Washington Airport. It had been a quick trip. Only a few hours before, I had left the university campus. And now here I was, ready for the Chemical Corps assignment I had been called down to Washington for. I knew very little about the assignment, except that it was top secret. Of course, I was aware the Army Chemical Corps works closely with scientists in the industrial and academic worlds, so I could guess it had something to do with my being a professor of biochemistry. But beyond that, I would just have to wait and see. The colonel who met me at the airport said the first order of business would be a meeting with the chief chemical officer, then a short orientation survey of some of the key installations before getting down to work. I was glad to have an orientation because, well, in my mind, I had two questions about the work. The first question, with modern atomic warfare, was there any real need for this sort of thing? Were CBR weapons in the same league, so to speak, as the nuclear bomb? And the second big reservation was the impression I had about this kind of warfare as something cruel and uncivilized. Was it even morally debased? Oh, I know war is no tennis match, but I think I echoed the reluctance of most people to face up to chemical, biological, and radiological warfare. Ten minutes later, along with the other special consultants, I met the chief chemical officer, and the orientation had begun. Even then, the two questions I had asked myself still gnawed away, insistent, probing, always there. We were here as consultants, and would do our best, of course. But I knew myself well enough to feel those questions would have to be answered if it were really to be my best. Well, it didn't take me long to realize that no body of men was more anxious to face up to those questions than the Army Chemical Corps and the Chief Chemical Officer, United States Army.
Gentlemen, you've been asked to act as consultants on a project we of the Chemical Corps have developed, which bears on your specialized scientific and industrial backgrounds. We regard this as an opportunity to bring to bear a fresh viewpoint, an independent critical standard on a phase of our operation. We appreciate your taking time from your busy schedules to serve as consultants for the next few weeks. Now, I don't have to belabor the point here that the Army's job, together with the Air Force and Navy, is to maintain the peace and security of the United States. Our job in the Chemical Corps is to make available one set of tools for this job of maintaining peace. This set of tools consists of chemical, biological, and radiological munitions and defensive equipment. So that we'll all be thinking along the same lines, let's very briefly...
As I listened to the chief chemical officer, I began to have an idea of the military potential summed up in the letters CBR. In some respects, they are of ancient ancestry. Primitive flamethrowers were used before 400 BC by the Spartans against the Athenians. The Spartans also melted down pitch and sulfur, so the fumes would be carried downwind to the enemy. In 1700, Swedish forces set up smoke screens from burning wet straw to cover movements against the Polish-Saxon army. In the First World War, more than 2 centuries later, the Germans were using chlorine gas against a British rifle brigade near Ypres. About 1/3 of the American casualties in World War I were caused by gas. However, only 2% of the gas casualties died, compared to a mortality rate of 25% among the non-gas casualties. World War II incendiaries played an important role in the German Blitz of London in 1940. But the devices of the past bear only a token resemblance to the CBR implications of today. The C of CBR, chemical warfare, involves the military use of chemical compounds. Chemical warfare also includes the use of flamethrowers, portable or mounted. Incendiary materials placed on a target from the air. The employment of obscuring smokes is another example of chemical warfare. The B of CBR is biological warfare, the deliberate use by man of microorganisms to cause disease among humans. To cause disease among animals. And to cause disease among crop plants. Radiological warfare, the R of CBR, involves the use of radioactive materials on a specific target area. This includes the fallout from nuclear weapons, a grave problem in the event of a nuclear attack. The chief chemical officer continued to outline the overall picture of C, B, and R. Perhaps it was grim stuff to hear. But then again, what manner of fighting a war is not? I began to see that it is all very well for some to decry CBR warfare. But the fact remains that CBR weapons and tactics are just as much within the capabilities of our potential enemies as other modern methods of warfare. We were shown evidence of their efforts in this field. Said the Soviet defense minister in 1956 at the Communist Party Congress in Moscow, quote, "Any future war will be characterized by the mass use of air power, various types of rockets, atomic, thermonuclear, chemical, and biological weapons," end quote. The warning is right out in the open for everybody to see. In the event of war, then, CBR is just as likely to be used against us as the nuclear weapons. The Chemical Corps provides assistance to the Navy, Air Force, and civilian defense authorities. As the only agency of its kind in government, the Corps must carry out CBR research and development. In addition, the Corps' responsibilities extend over the manufacturing and procurement of CBR agents and munitions, a broad-scaled activity that cannot slacken because CBR advantages are obvious to any potential enemy. For example, aggressor military leaders know this advantage. Chemical and biological agents cannot ordinarily be detected by the human sensory organs. You can't smell anything, taste anything wrong, but the effect can be deadly. Another CBR advantage. Burrowing into the ground is the normal means of protection against explosive-type munitions. But the underground fortifications and trenches can be circumvented or penetrated by CBR agents. These agents are usually released in a heavier-than-air aerosol form, which flows over the ground like water, seeking and hugging the low places. The user of CBR can put a victim out of action for a period rather than maim or kill. But perhaps to an aggressor nation's military leaders, another advantage is paramount. Unlike other powerful weapons, CBR is not a weapon of total destruction. And destruction for destruction's sake is seldom the purpose of a military attack. From the viewpoint of the attacker, the rubble is only a byproduct. The attacker much prefers to occupy an undamaged target and use its productive facilities. Steel mills and industrial plants are the prizes. Remember how the Soviet forces were quick to remove industrial machinery from Germany and Manchuria after World War II? The only applause the aggressor demands is the resurgent hum of captured machinery. CBR weapons can leave the prize virtually undamaged and still inflict enough casualties to win wars. Without a doubt, then, if it were to their advantage, our enemy might use CBR. There, in a nutshell, is why we can't ignore CBR. The briefing was over. Now I was ready for a short, on-the-spot orientation of work in the field before starting my assignment. First stop, the Army Chemical Center at Edgewood, Maryland. Here are employed hundreds of qualified scientists, men and women in and out of uniform, with many more that number of technicians and skilled workers. From many points of view, Edgewood is the heartbeat of the American chemical warfare effort. In well-equipped scientific laboratories, highly competent scientists and engineers explore many important lines of inquiry. Their primary purpose, to cope successfully with chemical warfare. And coping with chemical warfare means coping with chemical agents, substances employed in chemical warfare for tactical purposes, as well as the munitions which can disseminate them. Pilot plants are designed prior to large-scale production of both the agent and the munition. Hand in hand with development on chemical agents goes the never-ending job of working up detection and protection devices which indicate the presence of gas in the atmosphere by sounding a warning loud and clear. Telling a man agents are in the air is one thing, but he must continue to go on with his work. The Chemical Corps has designed a new lightweight canisterless mask, just one of many developments in individual protection. Many different types of protectors have been developed. I saw just a few of these special masks, one for military personnel, one for non-combatants, an infant protector, one for hospital cases, and many others. At Edgewood that day, I began to gain a sense of how the Chemical Corps does not ignore any possibility in the defense against potential CBR attack. In one laboratory, I watched a demonstration of clothes treated to protect the skin against the vapors and spray droplets of blister gases. The contrasts between clothing which had not been specially impregnated and the chemically treated clothing was strikingly apparent. Drops that had soaked into the cloth before just rolled off like water from a duck's back. Perhaps one overriding truism best describes the work at Edgewood. To defend against CBR warfare, one must know all about CBR warfare. How, for example, the vital functions of the body can be affected. In clinical and physiological laboratories, doctors investigate the effects of chemical warfare agents on the human body and develop medical treatment to counteract these effects. Yes, to defend against, one must know, and the roads to knowledge are varied. In one laboratory, I saw a striking experiment of the effects of a certain harmless chemical compound. A cat's reaction to the presence of a mouse was just about what you'd expect at first, a typical hunter's instinct. A harmless chemical agent was introduced. The cat's behavior became temporarily frightened, defensive, contrary to his normal behavior. Although the primary purpose of the research at Edgewood is successfully coping with chemical warfare, peacetime benefits have also come out of the work. In researching for new chemical agents, intensive studies must be made on how these chemicals affect the human body. Just as an example, one of the body effects of the nitrogen mustard war gases is a reduction of the white blood cells. Why not then use these gases for treatment of cancers, where there is an abnormal increase in white blood cells? This line of inquiry may prove of value in the treatment of leukemias and certain cancerous growths. Another example out of many, studies of nerve gas effects have also led to a more effective form of artificial respiration. In all, more than 300 widely varying contributions of benefits to people everywhere have been made as a result of chemical core research, much of it at the Army Chemical Center. Not very far from Edgewood, in historic Frederick, Maryland, are the biological warfare laboratories. Here, men and women of science are doing basically the same type of work as in other government, university, and industrial laboratories. A combination of medical and public health research. While I was at Fort Detrick, I was able to follow partway through an experiment to determine the effectiveness of an agent. Volunteers are important to the testing picture. For many years, information has been needed on the effect of a biological warfare attack on man, so that we can have a better understanding of how to defend ourselves against it. The volunteers were a picked group. They had received psychiatric interviews to determine their maturity and reliability, as well as mental outlook. Medical histories and laboratory checks on the volunteers had been extremely stringent. Any history of a chronic disease, any allergic reaction or nervous disorder was a cause for rejection. Volunteers were given the opportunity to drop out at any time with no stigma attached. I was to watch the progress of the experiment from the control room. volunteers had been positioned in cubicles on the outside of the test sphere, a hollow steel ball 40 feet in diameter, in which a cloud of biological warfare agent can be generated. Through a series of controllable valves and a face mask, it was possible to expose a person in each cubicle to a measured volume of biological aerosol from the sphere. I said before I was able to follow part way through the experiment, the final part. As was expected, the volunteers were temporarily incapacitated, but within a short time they were up and around, completely recovered. They had the satisfaction of having played an important part in obtaining information which would immediately be given to the Public Health Service to bolster our defenses against disease. Research has led to many scientific findings beneficial to mankind, such as a perfected vaccine for controlling industrial anthrax, a usually fatal disease of cattle and sheep. Still another accomplishment, protective devices for the safe handling of disease-causing microorganisms and their harmful products. Just a few of the many byproducts of biological warfare research. From Fort Detrick, I went by train to Anniston, Alabama, where Fort McClellan, home of the Chemical Corps Training Command and school, is located. I sat in on a few classes. I noticed, along with Chemical Corps personnel at the school, are representatives of the other services. There are representatives of public health, civilian defense, and other agencies. Officers of the military forces of friendly foreign nations are also present. A heavy emphasis is placed on radiological warfare, along with learning how to deal with the atom in peacetime. A steady program of laboratory exercises teaches Chemical Corps students the fundamental procedures involved in the handling of radioactive materials. Calibration exercises train the students in the maintenance of the radiation detection devices they will use in the event of a nuclear emergency. At Fort McClellan, the techniques of survey and monitoring are taught to selected non-commissioned officers. They will return to their units as instructors in these same subjects. Techniques used were developed by the Chemical Corps during bomb tests in Nevada and the Pacific. Practice gives the students the background to cope intelligently with any nuclear emergency that may arise in the future. Students also have the opportunity of monitoring radioactive fallout by ground and air means. I had one more visit to make before returning to Washington, to the large test site of the Corps at Dugway Proving Ground, Utah. Here, the Chemical Corps holds field trials to determine the effectiveness of CBR munitions. Trial runs conducted at Dugway duplicate the actual conditions in the event of emergency. Sampling devices positioned throughout the test area yield valuable information to Chemical Corps researchers. Also at Dugway, is one of the processing stations for atomic wastes established by the Department of the Army. Use of the atom has resulted in the accumulation of hazardous radioactive wastes in many areas. The Chemical Corps collects and processes this waste material and ensures its effective and permanent disposal. For the safety of everyone, the wastes must be controlled. Currently, the Army Quartermaster is using the hot cell to study new methods of preserving food without the need for refrigeration. The cell is a complex installation designed for the remote handling of high-intensity sources of radiation in complete safety. I sampled meats which had been kept for many months with no refrigeration. And I'll tell you something, it was very tasty too. Next morning, I was back in Washington. My orientation finished, ready for work. Only a few days before, I had come here for the first time. And since then, a lot of doubts had been swept out of my mind. I was beginning to grasp the mission of the Army Chemical Corps, more important than ever in the era of the atom. Something else, too. I realized now, in the context of war, with its inevitable cruelties and tragedies, CBR warfare is not the horror often pictured, if one has a true understanding of it. In any case, we must be prepared. That's the surest way of never being a target for CBR. Perhaps you can understand then why, as I stepped into the conference room to start work, I was determined to give everything I had to the crucially important program of the Army Chemical Corps.
In today's big picture, you saw volunteers, military as well as our now famous cat Speedy, participating in the Chemical Corps' testing program. At no time were they in danger of suffering any permanent injury, nor did they, if our cat's recent family addition is any proof. In the event of an all-out war, chemical, biological, and radiological weapons are just as likely to be used against us as are the nuclear weapons. Coping with CBR is the responsibility of the Chemical Corps, and one the Corps is working day and night to meet. Now, this is Sergeant Stuart Queen, your host for The Big Picture.
The Big Picture is an official report for the armed forces and the American people. Produced by the Army Pictorial Center. Presented by the Department of the Army in cooperation with this station.